Welcome to Movie Oubliette, the film review podcast for movies that most people have mercifully forgotten.
I'm Dan.
And I'm Conrad, and in each episode, we drag a forsaken film out of the oubliette.
Discuss it and judge it to decide whether it should be set free
or whether it should be thrown back and consigned to oblivion forever. We review the films others tend to forget. Come with us and open up the movie oubliette. Welcome, listeners, to the 75th episode of Movie Oubliette, the equator-spanning podcast for forgotten, fantastical films, with me, Conrad, getting a vaccine and a haircut in Cambridge, UK.
And me, Dan, going camping for the first time since 2019 with my dog in Melbourne, Australia.
We focus on sci-fi, fantasy and horror movies because we love whimsical architecture, mysterious aquatic creatures and robots getting their heads blown clean off. Dan, how are you?
All about that whimsy, right? The more whimsy, the better.
Oh, yeah.
I'm good. How are you, Conrad?
Well, I'm feeling a lot more positive, yes, because I can get my hair shortened.
Yes.
And I can get inoculated against, potentially deadly disease. So I'm feeling brighter, the sun's out, weather's getting warmer. I sold my house.
Yes, yay.
So I might be moving soon if everything goes okay. So yeah, lots of excitement here. And you went camping.
I went camping, yes, over the long Easter weekend. And yeah, it was nice. Nice, relaxing. First time with our dog, who was still very young and woolly, so walks were a challenge. He wanted to sniff everything. But yeah, he was surprisingly good in the tent, and it was a good long weekend.
Okay.
Good to get out of the city.
Yeah, I'm sure it was actually. I actually saw my brother over Easter, so I was able to give him my Christmas presents.
Christmas and Easter.
Christmas and Easter in the garden, because we're still not allowed to have people in our houses at the moment. But
yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Yes.
What a world we live in.
Good presents, though.
Yeah, good presents. But, I mean, they genuinely were surprises because none of us can remember what we said we wanted.
Yes. Okay, talking about surprises, anything in the mailbag today, Conrad?
Well, we gained some new patrons, which is wonderful. Very excited.
Yay.
To welcome aboard Brian DeFrancesco, Timothy Hayes, Retro Blasting, thank you, Michael French.
Whoa, Michael.
And none other than Catherine Mary Stewart. So,
No.
yes, we are now sponsored by Catherine Mary Stewart, which is really exciting.
Wow. She's probably listening to all that bonus stuff you posted like 2 years ago.
Of her, yeah. Yeah, bless her. It's really kind of her. So yes, thank you. Welcome aboard. I hope you enjoy all the bonus materials and voting. And if anybody else out there would like to join in the fun, please do.
Become a patron.
We also heard from Chad Rommel on Outland. He said, love this film. The lived-in grubby tech is so convincingly utilitarian that it feels real. Deserves a Criterion release.
Oh, yes.
Could do. Or maybe a Screen Factory. That would be good.
Yes.
We also heard from Chris Henschel about Outland. Great movie. Saw it in the theatre as a kid with my dad.
Oh.
And those helmets are basically as practical as the similar ones in Alien. Gotta see those actors' faces, though.
You do. That's what's important. Who cares about their comfort?
Yeah. Even underwater, where the pressure's ridiculous and it's completely stupid to have big face plates like that. But yeah. Mark D with a C said, thought this was a really good film that's overlooked. Connery was great.
Yeah, definitely.
And also we heard from a Surge of Cold Crash Pictures.
Oh, hello, Serge.
Hello, Serge. On Coherence. And he said, Coherence is such a fun little puzzle box of a movie. No joke, I watched it once, then watched it again the very next day to relive the experience, knowing what happens in the end.
Oh, wow.
Fun experiment.
For once, he likes the film that we enjoyed.
Yeah. He says, such a great example of super high concept, super low budget filmmaking. I probably never would have heard about it if not for Movie Oubliette. So, there you go.
The ultimate compliment.
Indeed, we fulfilled our mission because that's why we are here.
Yes. So what are we going to be exposing to the world today, Conrad?
Well, let me just amble on over to this oubliette and find out. Oh, right, I just dropped myself down. Oh, it's all wet in here.
Again? That plumbing. Oh, what's that?
Oh no, there's something in here with me. I'm grabbing the film and coming back.
Okay.
Look, we're being attacked by a crossword puzzle.
So what do we have today?
So today we have the 1992 American fantasy comedy film Toys, directed by Barry Levinson, co-written by Levinson and Valerie Curtin, and starring Robin Williams, Michael Gambon, Joan Cusack, Robin Wright, LL Cool J, and Jamie Foxx in his feature film debut.
Right?
It's pretty amazing.
Sounds like a hit.
It does, doesn't it? And it deals with an eccentric toy maker, Kenneth Zevo, who discovers he doesn't have long to live, so he leaves his whimsically gaudy factory to his military brother, Leland, rather than his devoted but immature children, Leslie and Alsatia. General Leland and his camouflage-obsessed son, Patrick, quickly enforce a repressive regime on the once happy workers and begin developing toys that could be used as war machines controlled by gaming-addicted children. Will Leslie, his manic pixie sister, and his manic pixie girlfriend, Gwen, be able to expose the general and defeat his mechanical army to restore joy and innocence to the Zevo legacy? And will they be able to do it in time for the next office Christmas party? Find out.
Right.
And we will be joined by a special guest today as well to help us through this strange land.
Can't wait.
Can't wait, yes. After the break. Our special guest today is a writer, producer, and cultural critic, and the creator of the Pop Culture Detective Agency, a series of mind-blowingly insightful video essays on intersections between politics, representations of masculinity, and popular entertainment. We are very excited to welcome the one and only Jonathan McIntosh. Hello!
Hey! Welcome.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's very exciting to have you here. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing all right, all things considered, you know.
Good, good. Have you been beavering away on lots of new essays in lockdown?
I have a lot of ideas and a lot of notes and not a lot of finished products.
Right. I am a huge fan of your videos. I find that I've learnt so much. I feel educated every time I watch them.
Thank you.
The sexual assault of men, Played for Laughs, the abduction as romance, Born Sexy Yesterday, and the one that I share constantly, and the first one I ever saw was the adorable misogyny of The Big Bang Theory. It confirms the fact why I don't like that show.
Yeah, well, I'm really glad that you found them somewhat insightful. They do take an enormous amount of work. It means I have to watch. Like, I watched every episode of The Big Bang Theory twice.
Wow. Oh, my goodness.
And I took detailed notes. There's 10 seasons. It's a lot of garbage to wade through.
Yeah.
So I'm happy that it's useful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sometimes you make me realize why it is that I'm troubled by something, because that most recent series of Stranger Things, I thought something about this is really bothering me. And then you did your piece on belligerent romance. And I thought, aha, that's what it is that's bugging me.
Yeah, I mean, I am sort of blessed and cursed with an amazing memory for media. And so, you know, all the stuff that I've seen, TV shows and movies, I remember them in some detail. And so I can go back and say, oh, that's a reference to Cheers. And then that reminds me of, you know, these 4 other things. And, you know, when I remember, I mostly remember correctly. Although sometimes I go back and watch something and go, oh, I didn't remember that quite right. But you know, there's no shortage of examples of the things that I talk about. So I find a pattern. There's usually dozens, if not hundreds, of examples that I can pick from.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, something thing that you've pulled out of your memory for us today is Toys, the 1992 American fantasy comedy film directed by Barry Levinson. It quite famously sank without a trace upon release, much overshadowed by another Robin Williams vehicle, although he didn't intend it to be a vehicle. We'll talk about that. Disney's Aladdin. How did you first come across this movie, and why did you pick it for us to talk about today?
Yeah, it is a very weird movie for a whole bunch of reasons that I'm sure we're going to talk about. I was like 13, I think, when I first saw it. I was in an art magnet high school. And so, the movie is very heavily influenced by the surrealists, especially Magritte, the Belgian painter. And so I was drawn to it for those reasons. It sort of has this whimsical, surreal quality to it. And I even had a poster on my wall as a kid, mostly because I really liked the poster, which is inspired by Magritte, where the guy is wearing a bowler hat and there's a hole in the hat and you can see through it.
Yeah, I'd not seen this before. Had you, Dan?
No, I'm a massive Robin Williams fan.
Right.
He was my favorite actor growing up as a kid. I watched everything. But no, I've never seen this movie. Watching it now, it's very confusing. It is really hard to categorize as a film because you can say it's fantasy, but it's not fantasy, and it's almost edging on like magical realism in its approach to showing whatever it is that it is. What was your take on that, Jonathan, like watching it now as compared to when you'd seen it as a kid?
Yeah, so I hadn't seen this movie in many, many years, probably since it came out, right? So, watching it again, it is amazing to me how much I remembered. I mean, I remembered like quoting the lines to my friends in school. LL Cool J is one of the characters in the movie, and he's very good. And he plays a sort of military guy. And there's a scene where he's eating in the cafeteria with Joan Cusack's character, and he hates that his food is touching. And he keeps saying, "I'm a military man. I want a military meal. I don't want my peas invading my mashed potatoes." And we just loved that as a kid. I don't know why, and so we would constantly like repeat those lines, me and my friends. And I was surprised at how much how familiar this movie seemed to me.
Yeah.
Even though I haven't seen it for almost 30 years.
Wow, yeah. I mean, does it make sense as a movie now? As an adult.
Does it make sense? It's very weird. It's very sort of tonally disjointed almost. Like it feels like it's not sure what it is, but it's very confident about that.
Yeah.
But what struck me watching it now is how prophetic it was in terms of the themes and ideas. Because at the time, this was science fiction in a lot of ways, right? All the stuff about the military drones and even the VR stuff, like all that was science fiction, like just pure science fiction at the time. But now it's not at all science fiction. Now it's just the way it is. And so it's a little bit weird watching it because you're like, well, in 1992, the military didn't fly drones in other countries and use video screens to do so, and they didn't recruit with video games, and they didn't actively recruit video gamers to fly these drones, which is all things that they do now, at least in the United States. And so this was supposed to be sort of satire, right? It's supposed to be like a Dr. Strangelove kind of thing in terms of the military aspect.
Yeah.
But now we look at it and go, well, they were right.
Yeah, I think it predated the first test flight of a Predator drone by 2 years, I remember reading.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't use them in the United States until 2001 regularly. So,
right.
I mean, we had used them as sort of as, in the Iraq War, they were used as surveillance, but they were huge, things.
Yeah.
1992 seems like a curious time to come up with something that appears to be certainly anti-war, but more along the lines of warning about the military-industrial complex again. Because, 1992, we're about to enter into the era of Clinton. It's sort of post-Gulf War, at least. And everything just seems to be on a almost ennui level of niceness and blandness, and there doesn't seem to be much to be terribly worried about until the early 2000s. So it feels like odd timing for this kind of movie. I'm used to this kind of movie emerging during times of great social strife, nervous times, And because it is so primary coloured and striking in terms of its production design and in terms of its general tone, I think Barry Levinson described it as a dark comedy in primary colours.
Yes.
It's an odd combination and it's odd timing, I think, really, for the fable that it's telling and the warning that it's giving us.
Yeah, I mean, I read that he'd been working on it for about 10 years. I think in the United States especially, there is a very strong anti-war movement. And, there's no shortage of U.S. military incursions to be against. And so, it happens there's, especially in the 80s under Reagan and then Bush Sr., you had invasions in Panama, you had invasions in Guam, you had all kinds of stuff going on in the Middle East, and then, of course, the first Iraq War. And so the United States is sort of this perpetual state of warfare. And so it makes sense to me, I think, a little bit more. It's not a mainstream opposition to war in general, but there certainly are pockets of it. It's rare to see Hollywood do it.
Yeah.
But I think it's sort of inspired by that sort of perpetual state of sort of low-level warfare the United States had been involved in throughout the 80s and early 90s.
Yeah, I agree. And the fact that it did take 10 years of him developing this movie and constantly getting turned down by studios, it's something that he probably envisioned at the time of political unrest, and by the time it got actually made as the passion project that it was. Because, I mean, compared to his other films, this is very strange.
It's very weird. I mean, it's the kind of movie that you can only make if you've made a whole bunch of really successful, critically acclaimed films for the studio, and then they finally say, sure, you can make one weird one.
Yeah.
I feel like it's that one,
It's like every band ever as well. They make the hits and then they make the weird album with the strange time signatures and using like kazoos and the sounds of dogs barking or something.
I can't imagine this film being made now. It has like a $50 million budget.
Wow.
And at one point it occupied every stage on the Fox lot.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, watching it, I was struck by the fact that there's no CGI here, I don't think. I mean, this is all practical effects. I mean, they built all of that stuff and had it move.
Yeah.
That's so expensive, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, even the toys themselves. That's a lot of toys that they had to make.
And the sets, they're pretty incredible, like the factory floor with the giant characters that all the toys are spilling out of.
Yeah.
It's not as big as it appears on screen because halfway along it there is a mirror. And if you look carefully, you can see that I think there are 4 things and then they repeat again. But still, it's a huge set, so impressive visually.
Yeah, and I can't believe that it didn't win for production design at the Academy Awards either. Because it seems like that's the one thing. I mean, you watch the film and there are just these beautiful vistas and interiors. They're kind of breathtaking. And the camera is allowed to linger on them much longer than you would expect. And so you really get a chance to see them. I mean, there's a scene where there's sort of like this interior within an interior, and the Joan Cusack character is sleeping in this giant swan that kind of like is a mechanical bed. And it lights up and everything.
It's like a coffin. That's how I imagined it.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's incredible. And it's only for one scene and you never see it again.
Yeah.
Like all of that art direction and production design for that tiny scene. Phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right that I can't imagine anyone funding a movie like this ever again.
But it got to a point where it was distracting. Like it was actually making the plot meaningless. Every single scene, there was something in it that I thought, why is that like this? Like, what? Like, even when they go into the office and the stairs are on wheels that they have to roll to the door. And then it's like, what? Why? And then the grandfather who is in an army tent in a room. Why?
Because it's inspired by surrealism and Dadaism. And if you're asking why, then they've won, you see.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's what I kind of came to as a conclusion, because it was just like absurdity for the sake of absurdity. Like you weren't supposed to understand it, but it was, as a movie, I don't know whether that works.
Yeah. Well, it's self-contained, though, because the entire world is a fable. It's not as though the audience has an audience identification figure who stood looking at all this insanity saying, this is insane. because even the general, who's
Yeah.
certainly an outsider being introduced to a world that he doesn't agree with, but he also comes from an absurdist version of the military life as well, especially LL Cool J and his obsession with camouflaging himself even as a sofa. It's uniformly absurd and extreme. So it's a piece, it's a self-contained fable. In that way, it reminds me very much of Edward Scissorhands coming out in 1990, which in itself, the suburbia that Tim Burton created there is just as absurd as the Gothic castle that's just sort of up the hill.
Yeah. Yeah, but with Edward Scissorhands, you have a point of reference. It's obviously satire of something that's familiar. With toys, it's satire of something that no one's ever seen. I don't know. I feel no connection to it. And I just felt really dissociated from all the characters. Like I couldn't latch on.
Yeah.
I feel like in watching it this time, I was struck by how similar at least the military parts are, the absurdity of the military parts, which are absurd in a different way than the Toy Factory is. It reminded me a lot of Dr. Strangelove.
Right.
Yes.
You know, we're going to take this sort of military characters, we're going to make them into these bizarre, absurd caricatures in an over-the-top way that then reveals how twisted their worldview is. And I thought that some of those scenes worked, I think, the best, right? Where you have the general in his office, you know, trying to shoot the fly with a gun. And then, you know, and then he kind of shoots his foot. It's very Peter Sellers in a lot of ways.
Yes, I thought that.
True.
And then, you know, the general gets more and more absurd as well. He sort of gets folded into this sort of toy factory, and his uniforms, you know, change, and now they're brightly colored camo with like yellow and almost like Lego colors.
Yeah. He assimilates, doesn't he?
And I actually kind of, you know, it's weird, but I liked the tent inside the house with the grandfather figure. It was also very weird. And then, the last scene where the general ends up in that tent with his father and they're saluting these little army men that go on this conveyor belt.
Yeah.
All of it, I think that stuff will work really well as a sort of an absurdist portrait of the military.
Yeah,
right.
sure. I mean, the one thing that interests me about that is I was trying to spot a pattern, and the best that I could come up with is that although Leslie and Alsatia, the Zevo kids, they live in a world where you frequently have these spaces within spaces. So Alsatia's bedroom is like a set inside a larger room. And also Alsatia works inside like a doll's house where she sort of tries on the clothes for the dolls herself.
The clip-on
Clothes, yeah. But again, it's a box inside another box. The thing that I noticed is that Leslie and Alsatia are never pretending to be something that they're not. They are playing inside these sets inside sets, but they're always just a reflection of the larger thing. Whereas the old general is inside a World War II military tent inside an opulent mansion. So he's pretending to capture something that he no longer is. It seemed to me that, one set of characters is more authentic, whereas the others are self-delusional or egotistical in some way. That was the best I could come up with.
I'm impressed, Conrad.
I think that's on point. I mean, it certainly draws a distinction between sort of the whimsical, childish sort of absurdity of the Zevo kids, and on the other hand, the sort of dangerous absurdity of the military.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting with Alsatia too, because she's actually showing you her authentic self in a way that you might not suspect until you watch the film a second time, because all the way through the film, she's been dropping these massive hints of exactly what she is. And I did not pick up on it. I was shocked in the third act reveal.
Yeah. The first time I saw it, I was as well.
Yeah.
But watching it the second time, I was like, oh, I see. Okay, that makes sense. I thought it was just weird for being weird.
Yes.
But actually, no, there's this other layer here.
What's the specific points?
What, in terms of her giving away who she is? I mean, spoilers. We always assume if you get to this part of the discussion that you've watched the movie. So she is actually a toy herself. She's not a real human being. So she's in a doll's house, dressed as a doll, designing dolls, things. She's eating a sandwich with nothing in it. The general says that doesn't seem very nutritional, and LL Cool J says, well, it seems to be working for her because she never gets any older.
Oh, she never gets
There's
any
just like
older,
all the way through the movie, she makes it very, very plain who she is.
Right.
And I did not pick up on it.
Yeah. I mean, you could say maybe the Swan bed is like a charging station.
It could well be.
You know?
Yep.
It's surprising that Robin Williams isn't the craziest character in this movie.
It is. And can I say something quite daring and see how strongly you react to it? He's not funny in this movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I do feel like this movie has a tone and a vision artistically, like visually, but I don't think it has a direction in any of the characters, really. And so I just felt like Robin was just riffing all the time, and they just let it happen. I don't know, Robin Williams just seemed to be Robin Williams in this movie. He wasn't a clear character to me.
Yeah, it was odd to watch it now and then to go back and look at the timeline, because it seems like this is reminiscent of Aladdin, right? His genie character, which is just sort of like a manic mile-a-minute sort of a stand-up routine kind of thing, which is what, Robin Williams was originally famous for. It seems like it's sort of riffing on that, except that movie was in production at the same time and had come out a month earlier, so it's not referencing that. It's much more a reference to his character in Good Morning Vietnam, I think.
Sure.
Now we sort of think of Robin Williams as a character who does that kind of thing in film, but he hadn't really done that stuff in film other than Good Morning Vietnam up until that point, because again, this is 92. It probably felt like a daring move for them to just have him ad-lib and improvise on set, but it doesn't really work here. I felt like the gags that he does go on too long, like it could have been heavily edited. The things that work the best for me are when he just sort of does one sort of offhand joke or very sort of subtle and works it in. It feels natural. Like there's one where they're walking through the set of New York, and he kind of makes this little joke about being a parade blimp,
Yeah.
It's
sure.
quick, and it kind of like folds into the dialogue, and it doesn't distract. And I thought that worked really well. It's sort of when he's reined in, it works. But when he's just allowed to do whatever, like with the deviled eggs, that thing where he's moving them around, it goes on for way too long. It's not funny.
Yeah.
I don't understand why it's in there at all. I mean, I'm sure they thought it was hilarious on set, but it's weird.
Yeah. Every time Robin Williams would walk on the scene with some weird-ass contraption, like the smoking jacket or the jacket that kept making noises, it's just like, okay, I get the joke. Why is this still going on?
And it's not even that funny. It's kind of dad jokes. And some of it is so metatextual. It's so much Robin Williams on a set commenting on the set or on the costumes. It's sort of observational stuff that doesn't come from the character. So it takes me out of the movie and makes me worry about him. You kind of start to worry, actually, is he really this childlike and innocent, or is he actually creepy?
Yeah.
Because I don't trust him anymore.
There's this weird scene where he's like being cute and strange and childish, and he suddenly has this little devil puppet, and he's like, I want to get laid, right? It's very weird.
That whole thing with Robin Wright's character, Gwen, being hired by Leslie's father, I think it's fairly strongly intimated that it was deliberately so that she would meet and fall in love with, or for Leslie to fall in love with her, which is a little bit awkward.
A little bit awkward, a little bit creepy. Another character that's also creepy in the way that it's written is the nurse character that takes care of the general. That was cringe. That was very cringe. Yeah, those moments sort of break the tone for me in a way that I think hurts the overall film.
Yeah, it really does. And you're right. I feel like there needed to be more room for him to be just serious, I guess. In the 90s, there were two actors that did their thing, and that's what they were. Like Robin Williams and Jim Carrey. And some of those movies where they were given completely free reign, they're just like, that's just Jim Carrey being Jim Carrey. Like Ace Ventura, The Mask, Liar Liar. It's just like, he went all out. But the sort of movies later when they were more serious, there was a lot more heart and there's a lot more to hold on to as an emotional character. But with toys, even though there were sort of heartfelt moments, it felt kind of forced to me.
Yeah, I mean, that was a thing that we didn't see as much. That's sort of like, okay, we're going to have a movie, we're going to loosely write it, and then we're just going to have a funny guy come in and ad-lib. Just do lots of improv, right? That wasn't a thing that we saw very much. Now we see it all the time, right? So it's every movie with Will Ferrell, right? Whatever.
Yeah.
It's sort of a way of making a movie now, right? But at the time, I think it wasn't as much. I mean, Jim Carrey is probably the exception, and some Robin Williams. But both of them are actually very good actors when they're put in a role where they have to rein it in. Will Ferrell is too. I mean, Stranger Than Fiction is a great movie where he reins it in and it works really well.
Yeah.
Yes.
One actor that did surprise me, LL Cool J. I don't know how many films he'd been in up until this point, but he fits into the tone of this movie. He seems to intuit the world he should be in and how he should be behaving really well. And he's really funny.
Yeah. It's some of the best parts, of the film is him. I mean, that scene where he like folds himself out of the couch and he's like wearing a couch cushion and he's been like listening on their conversation is just brilliant. And there's another scene where he's, he just stops the car and like runs into the wheat field and it somehow it works. And I'm not entirely sure why, but it does. And he's very good at it.
Yeah. And I'm always very impressed when somebody who's just starting out in their Hollywood career is not afraid to do something that questions representations of masculinity as much as that. I mean, your entrance into the movie is wearing a floral sofa with a cushion for a backpack, and you're a rap star. It shows a lot of courage and good humor, I think.
Yeah, and I think his character probably has the most clear arc.
Yeah.
He changes, right?
does.
I mean, he starts off as the son of a military man who's in the military and is all for it. And then he really has the growth. I mean, he has this sort of kind streak, right? He's very concerned about his family and the people around him. And he eventually drops the military pretense and sides with humanity, which I felt was very compelling.
Yeah.
Also, just quick side note, Jamie Foxx is in this movie as well.
He is, yeah.
The tiniest character.
I think this is his first movie ever. I think this is the first time he's in a movie, is this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's very good as well, actually. He's in a couple of scenes and he's funny in both. It's good to see him looking very young.
Yes, he looks like he should still be in high school.
But unfortunately, the women in the movie, not given much to work with. One's a manic pixie dream girl and the other one is a manic pixie robot girl.
Well, I mean...
It's not great.
Not too manic, though. I mean, side by side with Robin Williams, it's hard to be the manic pixie dream girl.
Yeah, well, I think Joan Cusack, I mean, a lot of people have pointed out that Lawrence LaBeouf's role as Apple in Turbo Kid is very oddly reminiscent of Joan Cusack's role as Alsatia.
And they're both robots as well.
And they're both robots.
Yeah, right.
And Robin Wright as Gwen, you think that she might be, again, the audience identification figure, but then halfway through the diner scene when he makes some joke about, is your tuna sandwich dolphin friendly? She just makes a dolphin noise and walks off. And you think, okay, so she's just fully assimilated into this world as well. So.
Yeah, she, the women are there to sort of support the men, to be love interests, to sort of offer... in Joan Cusack, spouts wisdom, sort of childish wisdom. And they're not fully realized characters. I mean, I was having fun imagining what this movie would be like if Robin Williams just wasn't in it.
Right.
I think it would be a better movie. I think that the two women could be the stars, and I think it would be a very different film, and I think it would work better. So I think... as much as I like Robin Williams, I think he kind of distracts from what's going on. And then you have these other, like you're saying, the female characters are just sort of there to support these guys in their quest in various ways.
Yeah, I mean, even if you pick out the climactic scene, Robin Wright and Joan Cusack are just kind of left behind. Like, they're not even given anything to do in that toy scene.
No, at least they don't have to get rescued.
That's true.
Michael Gambon is quite a surprise.
Yeah, Dumbledore.
Yeah. Dumbledore
As the
playing
general.
the American general who unfortunately can't shake his British accent.
Oh, that's the strangest scene.
Well, I don't understand why they try to explain it. Like, of all the things in the movie that they have to, like, explain in dialogue, why that? Like, just roll with it. I mean, LL Cool J is your son, and we're totally fine with it.
Yes.
I don't understand. This is a movie that's supposed to be absurd. Just let him have his accent.
Yeah.
Now it's time for Random Trivia.
So, Dan, what fascinating piece of trivia did you discover in a barrel of laughs today?
Well, this piece of trivia I didn't actually read on Wikipedia or IMDb for once. I noticed it myself.
Ooh.
And there is a actress in this movie, and she's a very small character, side character. She's one of the researchers, the toy researchers. And I did notice her sort of facial features. She has quite sort of a mousy face. Her name is Yeardley Smith. And
yes.
she is most famous for being the voice of Lisa Simpson.
That's
and I
right,
didn't
yes.
realize that she was even in this movie until I looked her up in the cast. So yes, Lisa Simpson is one of the researchers.
She is, yeah. Not a very big part, though. She barely says
tiny,
a word.
Tiny,
Yeah.
yes.
And that's our trivia.
I would like to talk about the themes of this film. Like, there's obviously the sort of anti-military theme, but there's also the theme of innocence versus corruption of innocence. So the toys are innocence, but the video games is corruption and losing your sense of purity, I guess. But I felt like maybe they could have had more kids in the movie, like an actual child character.
Oh, right,
So you
yeah.
kind of saw the difference, because for a movie called Toys, there's a lack of kids.
Yeah, in fact, the only kids in the movie are the adult children who run the company or work at the company, and then there's the kids playing the video games in the simulation of war.
Yes.
And that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
I think. Other than there's the kids dancing in the opening, but
The strange Christmas scene.
Yeah.
At the start.
which is also very weird.
It cuts to at the end.
Yeah.
It's very jarring, the end, for me, how it cuts back to the Christmas scene.
Yeah, I think it's trying to give you the sense that the events of the movie have taken place over a year and that peace has been restored in time for the next Christmas.
Yeah.
But it looks like offcuts from the edit of the first scene
does.
just suddenly slapped together and jammed at the end of the movie to try and make it feel a bit happier.
Yeah.
When it isn't.
Yeah. It felt like maybe they didn't want to end on General Zevo getting killed.
Yeah.
Potentially getting killed. So they, they had the nice Christmas, happy, everything's fine scene at the end.
Yeah. But none of the characters that you've introduced throughout the film are in that scene. So it's just like, oh, we're looking at this again.
Yeah.
Not sure why.
Yeah, and then after that, they go back to the grave and they have the final scene with the children, or the adult children.
Yeah.
And that's the actual end of the movie. So yeah, there is this weird Christmas thing in the middle.
And it was released at Christmas, the movie.
Do you think reshoots then?
Well,
Just tacked on?
no, I don't think so. I think it was imagined as a festive movie. It just,
Oh, okay.
not particularly festive. I mean, I do think the use of the toys in the movie as a way of visualizing the corruption of innocence and imagination, I do think it works quite well. I mean, oddly enough, the final battle scene, although it includes a few lazy techniques that I don't like step printing instead of genuine slow motion, it feels like something that's been hacked about a bit to make it look a bit more exciting than the footage ended up being, despite their best efforts.
It's nauseating.
Yeah,
watching it.
some of it. Some
It's
of it.
blur.
Yeah, but there are a few things in it that I did find quite emotive, like the scene where sort of a half blown up bear is sort of embraced by another bear and you get these horrible pained toy bear noises on the soundtrack, and Hans Zimmer's doing his best to sort of wheel in the pathos. And I thought, actually, I'm finding this bizarrely disturbing and touching.
Yeah, I have a note about exactly that same moment.
Yeah.
Where the sort of the one bear is sort of comforting the other bear whose head has been blown off, and it's very dark, but also kind of it's you're like, oh, I'm feeling something here.
Yeah.
And most of the time with the toys, it's just kind of, oh, that's an old toy. But in those, there's a couple moments where you're like, oh, that kind of gets me. That kind of works, surprisingly.
Yeah, it does. It's like the toy that's a child with its arms upraised and its eyes wide in horror. Actually, because the toy itself has like a toy dog biting its bottom, but because you primarily focus on the child end of the toy and it slowly works its way out of the building until the last time you see it, it's sort of escaping the factory and just rolling down the hill, still waving its arms and screaming. It's kind of reminiscent of war photography of children fleeing terrible scenes of destruction. And so it's, again, weirdly disturbing and quite upsetting.
I didn't find that. I found it like completely tonally wrong.
Really?
Because it just looked hilarious to me, seeing this child with a dog biting its.
It is funny as well. It's an odd. I think that's kind of the sweet spot for what the movie wanted to be. It's kind of cute, it's kind of funny, but it's also quite loaded.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that one scene where you first see, what the general has been working on, and you have this little doll pushing a baby carriage, and there's a baby in the carriage, and it looks like all the other 1920s inspired toys or whatever. And suddenly the bottle raises, and it's a machine gun, right? And you're like, this is actually quite twisted.
Yeah.
Right? That he's turning these innocent-looking toys, but they're sort of hidden weapons of mass destruction, right? And it's evocative of the problem with landmines that look like toys and, a whole bunch of other stuff that's been, made in the real world that's horrific. And obviously this is an absurd version of that. And I felt like that worked. And then, there's a scene where LL Cool J is in the hallway and he's sort of surrounded by these two completely innocent toys. One of them's like a bouncing ball and one of them's like a little dolly. And he's like terrified, right? And we're like, what? And then they both have weapons. So that sort of makes sense. It's sort of these toys that look innocent but are actually deadly. But then you've got like the tanks and the helicopters, which are also, it's not quite the same thing, right? It felt like they should have either been really scary or they should have been innocent looking but deadly. And it felt like they were kind of in between, maybe.
Yeah. I think the movie would have worked better if they had more serious tones to the film in terms of the anti-military theme. Like maybe General Zevo as a completely straight bad guy, military guy would have worked better rather than this whimsical, multicolored shooting his foot guy. And the same with the military toys. Like maybe it would have worked better if they just looked like actual small tanks.
Or if they even just look like G.I. Joe almost. I mean,
Exactly.
like the toy aspect is okay. I think it's interesting to me because I actually liked the General Zevo character a lot. I wasn't expecting to the second time I watched it, but there's a scene where he is sort of passionately giving this speech to his son about his vision. And they're both in the field. It's at night. There's like a campfire. And he's like running around. And he's talking about the military and how it needs to be miniaturized and how we can. It's all about this sort of cost-benefit analysis of small planes and military using video game technology. And it's supposed to be this over-the-top satire, in the vein of Dr. Strangelove.
Sure,
and I think it really works. And I think it's actually works better now than it did then because almost everything he's saying actually happened.
Right.
The United States military does primarily fight its wars with drones. There's some 18-year-old kid sitting in a bunker in Kansas who's controlling the drone in Afghanistan.
Right. Yes.
With a video game interface, essentially. So that's real. It wasn't then, but it is now. And you have the U.S. military actively recruiting video game players, gamers, through a whole bunch of stuff. They have a very popular Twitch channel, which is run by the U.S. Army. Oh, wow. And it's a recruiting tool. They have a YouTube channel, obviously, that is very popular. That, this is not a conspiracy, right? They say what they're doing on their YouTube channel. Like, you can go watch their videos and see them recruiting children with video games. Like, it's not...
Wow.
This is not me, like, extrapolating. This is what they say they're doing.
Wow.
And they're quite proud of it.
Oh, my gosh.
They have this 18-wheeler... transformer almost that like it's an 18-wheeler with the U.S. military logos on it, and it transforms into a mobile gaming lab, and then they park it at all these events, and then kids get on and they have PlayStations and Xboxes and PCs in there, and then you can just play you can play Street Fighter and you can play Call of Duty and all this stuff. And then they have the professional esports military team who are soldiers who have been enlisted to play video games to recruit kids.
Right.
What?
That's what's happening, right now in reality.
Yeah.
Right? And so when you hear in the movie, he's got this crazy vision that's supposed to be satire, and yet it's real now. It strikes a different tone. It hits a lot harder
Sure.
now.
Wow,
I had no idea.
Blowing my mind. I did not know this.
No, I knew that they were involved in propaganda through movies. So, for example, Top Gun, I think, is the example that's often cited.
Oh, right.
And many of the Marvel movies, the Department of Defense has a whole wing that just deals with essentially propaganda in U.S. movies and in Hollywood movies. And so they often do cross promotion, which I guess you wouldn't see that outside of the United States, but like X-Men First Class, they had a whole cross-promotional thing where they had these ads on TV that were half an ad for the movie and half an ad for the U.S. military.
Oh my
and the
God.
idea was that like you could be like the X-Men by joining the army. I mean, essentially in those words.
Wow.
What?
Yeah, and then Captain Marvel was another one that they really pushed hard, and they did this whole like feminism empowerment kind of thing. But how you get that is by joining the Air Force.
Oh,
and so, and of course, to get these sort of cross promotional deals and to get all of the benefits from having the DoD, the Department of Defense, work on your film is that they give you access to their equipment and they give you access to their locations and they give you access to their soldiers as extras, right? All free of cost.
Wow.
And so a lot of these big budget movies that have, big military stuff in them, you probably couldn't do it, without the, using all of this stuff. So not only do you get to use it, you get to use it for free or cheap. And then the only thing that the Department of Defense asks for in return is final script approval.
Right.
They get to say or veto what's in the film, right, and how the military is portrayed. And so that's why a lot of movies, there's a very bizarre, out of nowhere stuff where the U.S. military is portrayed as good, even if there's some bad military thing happening. The actual army is good, right? So one of my favorite, and I say that facetiously, is at Jurassic Park 3, where they're just suddenly saved by the Marines.
Yeah.
And they're all like, "Oh my God, it's the Marines! Thank you,
Right,
Marines!"
yes.
It's
Yeah.
like, what?
That's my ultimate cop out of any ending to a movie. The army arrives. We're saved.
Yeah, happens at the end of The Mist as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, almost every zombie movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of things.
Yeah. Except 28 days later when, oh, wow, it's the army. Oh, dear.
Right. That one did not get script approval, I'm sure.
I'm sure it didn't, no.
Coming to you live from the Movie Oubliette Theatre, it's the prestigious Mobley Awards.
All right, listeners, Mobley Awards time. It's where we present our favourite clip-on clothes parts of the film in a number of utterly whimsical categories.
Best quote.
I still really like that scene with LL Cool J where he's talking about, building a little fortress around his mashed potatoes, and he doesn't like his food invading other foods. I mean, there's a lot of really charming moments like that really work for me. And Robin Williams doesn't deliver any of those lines.
No, he doesn't. No. The line I wrote down was, I want my string beans to be quarantined,
Right, yeah.
which I really liked.
Right, yeah. I mean, speaking of food, my favourite quote was from Joan Cusack's character, Alsatia, when they're sort of running through the corridors and the flashing lights start happening. Robin Williams asks, what do the red flashing lights mean? And then she replies, red normally means caution or beef if it's a bouillon cube. And it's so strange and random in such a sort of perilous situation that they're in. It's it was funny.
She's able to deliver some great lines. I mean, even ones that don't seem like they would work, like after the little baby, bottle machine gun thing, she kind of turns and says, "That's a very bad baby." And it works.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Best hair or costume.
Well, I'll go first and say that it is Alsatia yet again. I do love her plastic Lego hair pieces and her doll's clothes that have got the white tabs on the shoulders. It's just a lovely little detail. And again, it's just telegraphing what she is, but you don't pick up on it.
Right, yes. Was there any costume or hair that stuck out to you?
I mean, I would definitely say that it was LL Cool J's disguises. I mean, this is top-notch movie making in my opinion. So the one where he's wearing the couch, he's sort of camouflaged in the cushions is great. There's another one where he's like, it's a totally red room and he's speaking, but they can't find him because he's the same color of red. And then Joan Cusack has this sort of like offhand comment, which you kind of hear in the background, where she says, "That's a really hard color to match."
Yeah, right. Yes. It's funny because that gag is still being pulled off now in modern films. Like I recently watched the Johnny English movie, like the third one, and he does the disguise gag where he's painted exactly the same as like the wall.
Most 90s moment.
The only thing I could pick out was just the absurd comedy that doesn't really exist anymore. And it was very sort of prevalent in the 90s, like just a premise that you think doesn't work and they just run with it. So I've got a list of a few like 90s movies that did that. So Ace Ventura, Dumb and Dumber, Coneheads, Junior, The Nutty Professor, Biodome, just like crazy characters, crazy concepts that shouldn't work, but they do it anyway. And this kind of falls into that category as well.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, any 90s from you guys?
For me, I was going to say LL Cool J.
Oh, yeah.
Just because this was kind of the height of his fame, I think. I mean, we've come across him before on the podcast talking about Halloween H2O in 98. And of course, he was in Deep Blue Sea in 99. So yeah, that was my pick.
I think I would say the music was very 90s. You've got Tori Amos. You've got Enya is in there.
Oh yes.
And then you have that sort of music video that sort of plays a part in the plot, where they make like a fake MTV video, and it sounds to me like the Talking Heads.
It does.
Yes.
100%.
But it isn't actually the Talking Heads. I looked it up, and it is the guy who did "She Blinded Me with Science."
Yes, Thomas Dolby.
Who did that song? Yeah.
Yeah, and the soundtrack is Hans Zimmer at his most sort of Vangelis-y. It's that sort of synthy, very synthy period of his. But also working with Trevor Horn, who's probably the producer who defined the 80s.
Right.
So,
Video Killed the Radio Star, is that?
Yeah, Frankie Goes to Hollywood, Dollar, and one of my favorite albums, ABC's Lexicon of Love, all Trevor Horn productions and quite distinctive.
Did the score feel distinctive to you, Conrad?
Yeah, it does. It's an odd co-production, and it is cohesive as a whole. You can tell that it's Hans Zimmer and Trevor Horn, not a pairing I would have put together, but you can hear it. And all the songs are in, of a piece. They are all in the same style.
Right.
Favorite scene?
I do really like the scene where the general and his son are sitting at the campfire, and he goes on this rant about what he wants the military to be in a sort of crazed, manic way. And I think it really works. I mean, again, it's got that Peter Sellers kind of vibe to it, and I think it really lands. I mean, you really kind of get that this guy is unhinged, but the things he's describing are actually happening today in 2021. So for me, that worked really, really well.
Yeah, it does.
Right.
I love the way that fireworks go off behind him when he's finishing, and it's like, where, how, why is this happening?
There's a little line that you can barely hear, and I had to turn the subtitles on to see it. There's sort of a muffled, it's like, this is why you always carry a flare.
Right.
Yeah.
What about you, Dan?
Yeah, my favorite scene wasn't so heartfelt, but it was the kind of the funniest scene for me was the, we haven't talked about it, but the shrinking room.
Oh, that's mine
Yes.
too.
Yes.
Completely nonsensical, and I know they're sort of portraying something that is, I guess, happening, but metaphorically happening at the same time. They're in this room, they're all discussing the fake vomit and different sort of aspects of what they should be adding, and they should be aiming towards the Asian market, like this is too Anglo vomit, and all different types of food that they should be putting in. It's hilarious, and while they're having this hilarious discussion, the room is just getting smaller and smaller as these parts of it move in, like almost like Tetris.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, Robin Williams does one of his offhand jokes about, we're being attacked by a crossword puzzle, which
Right, yeah.
Again doesn't quite work because it's
I
too
think it
metatextual, but
I
it
think it
works
works,
better
yeah.
than the others. But yeah, no, I do love the bit where the Asian member of the team says this is obviously the vomit of a white man.
Most cliche fantasy moment.
It's kind of tricky, isn't it? Because we usually go by genre, and the closest one this is to the genres we cover is fantasy. But I didn't see that much by way of a fantasy movie cliche in here.
I could only come up with a movie cliche. This movie, for the most part, is wholesome. And wholesome movies, the bad guy doesn't die. Even
Right.
though he is attacked by some creature that we never see, the sea swine. He doesn't die at the end.
No.
Which is, it's wholesome.
It is, yeah. No death. Yeah. The only thing I could think of was what's called as Ghibli Hills, I believe. So the green rolling hills and the blue skies. I tend to think of it as a Windows XP desktop, but it is
Right.
but not necessarily a fantasy cliche, so to speak. But there we go.
Yeah.
When was Windows first released?
XP was 2001, so actually it predates and possibly inspired Windows XP's
there you
famous
go.
desktop.
There you go.
I did look that up because I did wonder myself. Yeah, October 2001.
Best special effect.
My favorite effect was the Zevo Mansion, which I couldn't figure out because they were saying so much of it was practical, and I thought surely that's a model. Surely it's a miniature, the pop-up book that folds down.
I think
It has
it
to be.
is.
Okay.
It looks like it, yeah.
Yeah.
I love that as well, actually.
Yeah.
It's just something I've never seen before.
Yeah, it's so bizarre.
It's great.
Completely convincing, though.
Yeah, it is. And especially the scene after is of a dollhouse and Joan reaching into it. It's like, oh, what? I thought that was real.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's really clever.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that is really nice. I love that dollhouse scene where they pan back and they have a miniature room within the room. You know, it's the same room, but in miniature. You know, that's really nice. I actually did like the cafeteria, and there's a sort of a mirror scene that comes later where the cafeteria closes in, like the little room did,
yeah.
and everybody gets squashed together. And it's supposed to be this sort of tragic moment,
yes.
you know, and everyone's squished and they're getting up on tables and they're trying to get away. So you know, the room is actually shrinking; it's getting smaller, and the actors are trying to get away from the furniture.
Yeah, physically, yeah.
Yeah, it's a feat of engineering, that.
Oh, yes, for sure.
Yeah.
Huge moving set.
Yeah.
Favorite sound effect.
The obvious choice would be the jacket that plays sound effects.
But it's so overdone and so annoying that it's
I know.
disqualified.
I know. Yeah. It's kind of like the Three Stooges kind of humor. It's like, okay, we get it. It makes noise. It's too obvious. But right at the start, there is a slinky that comes down the stairs that they walk up, the rolling stairs. And it has a really cool sound, a really sort of slick, metally, rattly sound that I quite liked.
Yeah, my favorite was the right at the very beginning of the film, just as the logos are coming up, you can hear somebody winding up a toy, and I just thought that was a wonderful way to start the movie.
touch.
Like, yeah, something bright and colourful is about to be unleashed upon you. I thought that was
For 2 hours.
for 2 hours. Yeah,
Be prepared.
yeah. So that was mine. How about you, Jonathan?
I think the sound of some of the toys is actually quite good. I mean, a lot of the toy sounds throughout the film, I think work really well. You've got that wind up that you mentioned. It added a lot, lots of mechanical twists and gears whirring and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I guess a sense of nostalgia as well for people that own toys like that.
Yeah.
Most funniest moment.
Mine is, we've mentioned it, the scene where the general is trying to explain to us why he hasn't got 4 stars because of his gosh darn it accent, his English accent, and he went to dialect school and then he starts talking in the worst impression of an American accent I've ever heard. He starts just talking out his nose pretty much, like talking like this. Like,
It's
what?
so bad. Actually, that's the thing. LL Cool J and Michael Gambon are the funniest things in this movie, not Robin Williams,
Yeah.
which is a crime. It's insane.
Yeah.
No, that was mine as well, and it was actually, even though it is borderline homophobic, his dad, played by Jack Warden, the fact that he speaks in sort of unintelligible mumbles because he's old.
Makes no sense.
But
yeah,
you do hear after Michael Gambon says something about one of my men tried to frag me, the old guy just says, a big cock.
Right.
But again, it's one of those moments when you think, sorry, who's this movie pitched at again?
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
And that's our Mooblies.
Hi, this is Andrew Belling, and you're listening to Movie Oubliette.
Final verdict time. Should toys be set free on a flying, bubble-blowing alabaster stone elephant to be enjoyed by the world, or should it be shot down by toy tanks and plunged into the oubliette to be attacked by a sea swine, never to be talked about again? Jonathan, you've presented us with toys. What's your final verdict on toys?
I think that it is a really interesting film to watch now. I think you got to be prepared for what you're going to get. But sociologically speaking, I think there's a lot going on that is interesting and worthwhile, and some things that have not aged well, as we've talked about. But overall, I think it left an impact on me as a young man, and I think it still has interesting things to say that are actually kind of more interesting now than they were when it was made.
Right. Yeah, right. I wish I'd seen this movie when it came out, like in the 90s, because on paper and visually, this is everything I wanted in a movie back in the 90s. I loved the blurring of lines between reality and dream and magical places, and I loved Robin Williams. I think on paper with the themes, yes, they're very compelling, but I don't know, as a film, I just felt just perpetually confused throughout every single scene. I thought, what? Why is that happening? And then they don't refer to it, and they just move on. And yeah, just too much whimsy. I don't know. I couldn't handle the whimsy.
Whimsy overload.
Just, so much whimsy. To the point where I couldn't connect with any characters. So I don't know. I feel conflicted because I think my kid self would have loved this movie, but as an adult, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm the same. I wish I'd seen it at the time, but as I didn't, I don't have any kind of nostalgia connection to it at all. And I just look at it and I just find things that don't work and don't engage me. I think it's astonishing to look at. I think tonally it's uneven.
Visually amazing.
It's visually
Set design,
amazing.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think the whole cast is doing their best, but I think Robin is just criminally unfunny, which is so odd. And as you say, Jonathan, I'd love to see a version of this which didn't have him in it, because I think it would have been much more interesting. But ultimately, I think it just left me cold. I mean, if it was a modern day fable like Edward Scissorhands that emotionally wound me up as well and made me care, then I think I would have plumped for it. But I think now it just sort of lays there as this kind of inert oddity that can be fascinating to watch, and is certainly politically it's very interesting to watch.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure I'd recommend it to anybody for fun.
Yeah, I think that it's a curiosity in a lot of ways.
Yes.
And I think that if you're interested in themes of militarism, or the way militarized toys are produced, I think it's good to watch. I think from a political point of view, it's good to watch, and from a set design perspective, you should absolutely watch this if you're interested in set design. I think that it would benefit. Like we said, I would love to see a re-edited version of it. Even if you can't remove Robin Williams, you could edit down his performance to an acceptable level with some heavy cuts.
Sure.
So I would love to see an hour and a half version of this movie, where a lot of the the improv was removed, and you kept the. I don't think it would be great. I don't think this is a great film, but I think it's a really interesting film for people who are interested in film, especially.
And even just like the actors alone, seeing them portray these types of characters, Princess Bride, Dumbledore, and Robin Williams. Like, what could go wrong?
Yeah. Toys. I think on balance in the show, I think we are throwing it back in the oubliette, though. But that's not to say that invalidates your opinion, Jonathan.
Yes. I would encourage people to watch it for just the experience of watching something that you've never seen before. Like, there's nothing like this movie.
And it's on Disney Plus in some territories.
Well, I at least hope you had a good time with it. That's
great to discover.
I also don't recommend it to friends unless I know them very well and their interests, and then I might, But I'm not just going to be like, oh yeah, everyone should watch this movie, because it's,
Yes, it is something else. All right, I'm going to put it back in.
Come here.
No, not the sea swine. No.
Well, even though we threw toys back into the oubliette, we were very grateful, Jonathan, that you brought it to our attention because we'd never seen it before. And your comments on it were, as always, very insightful and fascinating. Where can our listeners find more of your insight and fascination?
Well, I have a YouTube channel, which is called the Pop Culture Detective Agency, where I post all my my long-form video essays. And then, I have a Twitter account, which, I make sort of offhand comments about media I'm watching, although sometimes I do really in-depth threads. And I'm at Radical Bytes like the computer byte. I am currently working on I'm watching every Marvel movie, all 23 of them.
Oh my!
And I'm doing a Twitter thread where I comment on every single one of them, and this is basically just my notes made public, and so it's a little bit random.
Wow.
If you like an analysis of militarism in film or masculinity in film, there's a lot there, and there's I think I'm up to Iron Man 3 now, so I still have like 10 more, 14 more to go.
Well, that sounds fascinating, and I hope it turns into a video essay because all of them are pure gold, and I thoroughly recommend that everyone check out the Pop Culture Detective Agency.
Yes. And if you want to check us out, Movie Oubliette, we are that name on all social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
And you can email us at movie.oubliette@gmail.com. We love to hear from you.
Yes, and become a patron if you love us that much. As little as $1 a month gets access to all the extended segments from the podcast that are never released on the episode. And for $5, you get access to the minisode, our 1 monthly extra episode.
Yes.
Where we discuss new films.
Yes, most recently we looked at The Platform, marking its 1-year anniversary because it was released right at the beginning of lockdown in March. And it's interesting to look back on it a year later.
It is. Check it out.
Yeah.
Become a patron.
Yes. And if you'd like to rate or review us on your podcast platform, perhaps Apple Podcasts, something else, I don't know what you're listening to us on, but please do give us a star rating and a review if you have time. It really helps us out.
Yes, it does. So, Conrad, what movie are we going to be presented with next episode?
Well, it's patron's choice, so I guess we ought to spin that oubliette roulette and find out which one they picked.
Oubliette roulette.
Let's give it a whirl. Oh. Ooh, come on.
Oh, wow. It's landed on Maniac Cop.
Oh, okay. I've not seen this.
Me neither. So this is a 1988 American slasher film directed by William Lustig, written by Larry Cohen, so writer of the stuff, starring Tom Atkins, Bruce Campbell, Lorene Landon, Richard Roundtree, William Smith, Robert Zadar, and Cherie North.
Okay. Sounds classic 80s horror.
Yeah, it really does. This is the kind of thing that really did not appeal to me during the 80s, so I have not seen this.
Slasher.
Yeah, and written by Larry Cohen and starring Bruce Campbell, who we have seen as a cop before.
Yes, that's right. Intruder.
Blink and you'll miss him in Intruder. I was so disappointed because his name was plastered all over the advertising and he's like not in it at all.
Yeah.
So yeah, looking forward to that. That'll be interesting.
Yes.
Thank you, patrons, for voting for that.
Yes.
And thanks, Jonathan, for being such a great guest.
It's great to be here.
Stay tuned next time, listeners.
Bye.
Goodbye.
We review the films others tend to forget. Come with us and open up the movie oubliette.
You men stand over there for minor station until further notice.